Emily worked methodically in the restaurant's kitchen. She unloaded the huge dishwashers, wiped clean dishes with a towel, and loaded dirty ones again when the waiters brought them from the dining room. Their restaurant was the oldest and most famous in town. Getting a job here had been incredibly fortunate. Emily loaded another batch into the dishwasher and glanced at her watch. Her shift was ending soon, and she had to pick up her son. She had separated from his father a year ago, a man she'd married out of spite for her first love. She had discovered Walter was seeing someone else and dumped him right before prom, and married Ken hastily shortly after graduating from school. Her husband was controlling, forbidding her to work or pursue higher education, and then, 6 years ago, Emily became pregnant with her long-awaited son, and now she was working the restaurant, with hours that allowed her to pick up her child from daycare on time. Everyone was quite happy, but their family life gradually crumbled. Ken was rarely at home, spending all his spare time with his buddies. And a year ago, he suddenly announced, "I've fallen in love with someone else. We've been together for 2 years and we're expecting a baby. Let's divorce quickly. You and Tommy can't stay here. My new wife will move into this apartment. Find a place to live, and I'll help with money. Let's split up peacefully, without fighting over property or alimony." "Fine," Emily replied simply. "I'm glad you at least had the decency to tell me yourself." "Well, what's there to hide? But it's good you're not being dramatic. Others would throw a tantrum." "Don't worry, Emily," her mother-in-law interjected. "I'll see Tommy and help out." Emily just nodded resignedly. She found a tiny but cheap apartment for rent next to the restaurant. Her landlady, Mrs. Allen, lived in the adjacent place with her alcoholic son, Scott. At first, he even made unwanted advances. "So, you're my mother's new tenant," Scott accosted her at the entrance. His greasy hair hung in his face, his blue eyes glinting. "I'm Scott. And your name, babe?" "Emily," the woman replied. "But excuse me, I'm rushing." "What's the rush? If you're in such a hurry, you can be kicked out right away. Won't take long. Let's get acquainted properly. Sit and talk." "I need to pick up my son from kindergarten," Emily protested. "Watch who you're talking to. You're talking to the apartment's landlord," Scott snarled, grabbing Emily's arms roughly, and began forcing her into the apartment. She was saved by keys, which she had in her hands. With her makeshift weapon, she struck Scott's leg, using all her might. Once, twice, 3 times. His grip loosened. Mrs. Allen burst out of her door, wielding a broom, which she brought down on Scott's back. "You fool! Why are you harassing my tenants? You bloodsucker! Always stealing my pension, and now you want to drive away my tenants? No wonder no one stays here. It must be your doing." "She attacked me first, look!" yelled her son, showing his torn pant leg. "Serves you right. You'll heel like a dog anyway," Mrs. Allen retorted, then turned to Emily. "Don't be angry with him. He's a fool, crude and insolent, but cowardly. Just don't move out, and I'll keep him in line." "All right," nodded Emily, who had nowhere else to go anyway. "But let him know he won't get off so easily next time." Scott learned his lesson after a few more rebuffs and quieted down, barely causing trouble anymore. Soon, Ken and Emily divorced. Ken even helped Emily with the move. However, that was it. As expected, Emily never received the promised help. Ken didn't even call, showing little interest in his son. However, Emily's personal issues paled in comparison to her work situation. Emily's relationship with the administrator was strained. Deborah was an angry and jealous woman, though beautiful. When she hired Emily, she emphasized, "I value loyalty in people, do you understand? You must be loyal to me. If you notice anything important, report it to me." "Are you trying to make me a spy?" Emily protested. "Besides, Others won't confide in a mere dishwasher. Don't worry. People relax when they view you as furniture, Deborah smirked. Just keep your eyes and ears open. That way you might last longer than others. Emily learned her lesson and avoided arguing with her boss, but she never snitched on her co-workers. All this year, Emily had firmly endured Deborah's constant nagging and complaints. She could burst into Emily's workspace unexpectedly to check plate cleanliness and sanitary compliance, often making up new requirements on the spot. Yet Emily didn't complain. Her earnings were decent enough to support herself and her son, with tips shared among staff after each shift. This day, after her shifts, Emily would hurry to the kindergarten. Tommy would be dressed and waiting, walking near the porch with the security guard. "Tommy, let's go home," she said cheerfully. "We'll stop by the bakery on the way. We still have time." "Oh, great! I've been craving cheesecake all day, Mum. You can't imagine." Tommy chatted excitedly. "By the way, I need a suit, tie, bow tie, and white shirt for our New Year's performance. I forgot to tell you. Mrs. Fowley says we need to start dance rehearsals, and I need the costume by Monday." "Thanks for the notice," Emily smiled, kissing her son's rosy cheek. "We'll get you a suit, Tommy. You'll be my most handsome gentleman at the ball." "Mum, you're too exaggerating," her son laughed. "But we are getting lessons from a special instructor. Mrs. Fowley says he's a champion dancer." Emily checked her smartphone to find hundreds of messages in the parents' chat. She had the next day off while Tommy was invited to a friend's birthday party. The woman planned to use her time to buy a costume for her son, but the prices for new items were too high. With a week until payday, Emily felt discouraged. Then she remembered the nearby flea market, where bargains could sometimes be found. She went there and immediately spotted an elderly woman selling an almost new suit. Nothing fancy, but classic. "How much is it?" Emily asked. "I need it for my son's performance." "I'll give you a good price. It's practically new. My grandson only wore it twice before it went into storage," the woman replied. "Take it, dear. You won't regret it." Without hesitation, Emily bought the suit and went to the mall for a shirt and tie. The children had already finished playing on the trampolines and eaten their cake. That evening at home, she decided to check if the suit needed dry cleaning. She reached into the pocket and suddenly pulled out something thick, folded in half. It was a colour photograph of a beautiful young girl laughingly embracing a young man. It hit her like an electric shock. She had seen this picture before, but with a different person. Back in first grade, Emily had sat next to Walter, a serious and handsome boy. He was raised by his grandmother after his parents, both geologists, went missing on an expedition. Emily and Walter, too, lived in neighbouring yards, so they always walked home from school together. Walter carried her briefcase and protected her from bullies. Emily's mother, still alive and healthy then, adored Walter and approved of her daughter's friendship with him. By the last grade, everyone could see it. Walter and Emily were a couple for life. They made plans for their future together. Even the teachers smiled knowingly at their union. But right before graduation, nasty Hilary confronted Emily. Hilary was the queen of the school, a rich girl who came to school in a chauffeur-driven car. "Listen, you wretch, come here," Hilary snarled. "I'll show you something interesting." "What do you want from me? Talk to your girlfriends," Emily asked sullenly. "Look at this picture." Hilary thrust a photo at her. "Your precious Walter looks so happy with me." Emily studied the photo. Hilary wasn't lying. There she was, sitting on Walter's lap, hugging him. Emily threw the picture aside and rushed to the classroom. There, in front of everyone, she demanded to be sat away from Walter. She felt it beneath her dignity to let the traitor explain. Though Walter insisted, Nothing was happening between him and Hilary, even pleading Emily's mother to influence her daughter. It was futile. Then Emily's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Emily couldn't focus on trivial matters. Besides, Walter attended prom with Hilary, seemingly confirming the story. Soon after, Ken entered her life, appearing reliable at the time. Sadly, her mother didn't live a year after that. Their apartment turned out to be company-provided housing. Emily, now an adult, found herself homeless. That's when Ken proposed. But now Emily held another photo in her hands. Unmistakably, it was Hilary, in the same posing on someone's lap. Except the man wasn't Walter. Could it have been fake all along? Had she believed a deceiver who simply wanted to separate them? Even years later, the thought brought pain and regret for Emily. The woman barely slept that night. The next morning, she could hardly wait for the flea market to open. She took Tommy by the hand and hurried there, but the elderly merchant was gone. "Do you know the elderly woman in the grey scarf who was selling a suit here yesterday?" Emily asked one of the vendors, whose nose was red from the cold. "Mrs. Marsh, what do you want with her?" the woman asked suspiciously. "No complaints. She sold me something with a personal item in the pocket. The owner might want it back," Emily explained. "Don't bother looking. She won't be back for at least a week," sighed the vendor. "You see, Mrs. Marsh is a good woman, but she's had it rough, poor health, and on top of that, her grandson's paralysed from the waist down. She's caring for him." "How might I find her?" Emily asked anxiously. "It's important." "My, aren't you persistent?" the woman remarked. "I don't know her address, but I can tell you how to get there." The next day she dropped her son at kindergarten early. She had a couple of hours before work. The restaurant opened at noon, so the directions led to Walter's house, her school sweetheart. Realising she wasn't mistaken, Emily felt excited. She had to ring the intercom for a long time. Finally, a panting male voice said, "Grandma, have you lost your keys?" "Walter, it's me," Emily said after some hesitation. "Let me in, please." The door opened. Emily rushed up to the second floor. There, in the doorway, in a wheelchair, Walter was waiting for her. "Hello," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. "Come in." "I found a picture," Emily said. "Accidentally bought a children's suit from your grandmother." "And realised that I wasn't guilty?" Walter grinned crookedly. "I told you then that it was a montage." Emily sighed. "I'm sorry to barge in like this." "Never mind. Almost no one comes to our house now. Grandma went to queue for milk this morning and I barely managed to wheel myself over to the intercom," Walter said. "Good thing you waited and didn't leave." "And what about you?" Emily asked cautiously. "I'm so sorry for you." "Yes," Walter nodded and smiled. "You probably don't know, but after that incident I was furious. I married Hilary impulsively. Her father helped me with my further studies. Then we opened a restaurant and started working. I became a chef, a pretty good one if I may say so. I even won competitions." "Oh, you always loved cooking," Emily smiled. "I've never eaten anything tastier than your scrambled eggs." "Don't exaggerate," Walter replied seriously and continued his story. "We didn't have children, and we quietly ran our business. Her powerful father retired and moved abroad. That's when Hilary started drinking and driving drunk. I didn't notice at first, and then it was too late. One evening, she picked me up from the restaurant after work and crashed into a concrete pillar. She walked away without a scratch, but I got a fractured spine and ended up disabled." "How awful!" Emily gasped. "Can nothing be done?" "The operation costs money, but there are no guarantees. My grandmother and I are saving up, but it's slow going." "Won't your wife help with the money?" Emily asked. "After all, it's her fault." "I never accused Hilary of anything," Walter answered with a sigh. "Then, a half-year later, she came and said a crippled man didn't interest her any more. She filed for divorce, and I agreed.
it would be better.
And left you broken in the care of your elderly grandmother, sighed Emily.
Yes, we turned out to be quite different from Romeo and Juliet, Walter grinned. Tell me about yourself. What do you do? How do you live?
They chatted for a while until Emily realised she had to hurry to work. Deborah would be furious if she were late. The young woman promised her former sweetheart she would return. Walter watched her leave with a smile. Downstairs at the entrance, Mrs. Marsh met Emily. She immediately recognised her customer and grinned.
Had you guessed and remembered the address?
No, someone at the market helped, and then I figured it out myself, said Emily. Mrs. Marsh, isn't there anything that can be done?
What can we do? Sighed the woman. Surgery is necessary. I only have this apartment of value, so we can't sell it and live on the street.
Yes, that's true. Do you mind if I visit?
Of course not. Why should my grandson sit alone with an old woman? Bring your son, too. You brought him that suit, Granny added.
I won't leave Walter any more, Emily promised firmly, surprising herself with her conviction. But the words were said. She hurried to work, feeling elated. From that day on, after taking her son to kindergarten, Emily spent a couple of hours at Walter's. They even gave her a set of keys to the house. Her school sweetheart came back to life before her eyes. Walter started getting out of bed in the morning with pleasure. He began cooking simple dishes again, though he hadn't been near the stove for a long time. Mrs. Marsh quietly rejoiced at the changes in her grandson's behaviour. On weekends, Emily brought Tommy to visit. He quickly made himself at home, baking cupcakes with grandmother and playing chess with Walter. Watching them from the sidelines, Emily thought this could have been her family, if not for that foolish mistake of youth. Time flew by quickly. Tommy learned his dance for the kindergarten performance when Emily's ex-husband suddenly reappeared in her life. He came with questions for Emily's landlady, then began making demands, acting as if he still had the right to do so.
Tell me, where do you take our child on weekends? He doesn't have a normal home, and now his mother's got her hands full, going around with her lovers. You've got someone else, haven't you?
Why do you even care? Emily asked, looking squeamishly at her ex-husband. Need I remind you who shared the bed with another woman for 2 years of our marriage?
It's all your fault. You never loved me. Carla, on the other hand, values relationships.
Ken immediately jumped up to defend his new partner.
And anyway, this isn't about me.
Yes, it is about you, Ken, Emily snapped. For 6 months, you haven't given a penny for your son, haven't visited him once. And now what? You've come to assert your rights?
What's the big deal? The boy isn't starving. He has a mother. You haven't filed for child support.
Well, I will. You and your mother convinced me you'd help on your own. By the way, you said before the divorce that your wife was pregnant. Where's the baby? It's been a year already. Or is your Carla an elephant? They carry longer.
We're not discussing that, her ex-husband barked. Dump your lover, whoever he is, otherwise I'll file for termination of parental rights and take my son.
Of course, jealousy took over. You still don't care about Tommy, do you? Ken, I'm not going to listen to your nonsense any more. Now leave. You can see your son when he's home. Ken struggled to leave her rented flat. Emily felt defenceless against her ex-husband now. If only she could cure Walter, or at least help him walk again. These were just dreams, but she desperately searched for money. Emily decided to be more proactive. She went to the restaurant director. Mr. Koskoff wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't usually giving away money freely. He refused to give his employee a large sum. Emily left his office in tears. Then Deborah blocked her path. "Let's talk," she said. "I think you'll be interested. I don't know what you need money for, but you can get some. Of course, you'll have to do something in return." "What exactly?" Emily asked. "I desperately need the money."
"Well, look," said Deborah when they reached the dishwasher's workplace. "I work for these people. You know this restaurant, also very famous. They want to close our establishment. During this crisis, only one place will survive. I can't risk my reputation, so I need someone else to spoil the dishes. You need money, and my real employer will pay. When this restaurant closes, you'll come to work with me, to our competitors." "No, I'm not going to earn money that way," Emily replied. "Besides, if anything goes wrong, you'll blame me, won't you?" "Of course. What did you expect?" Deborah laughed. "That's how it works. By the way, you can't refuse any more, my dear. You know everything now, which means you're in the same boat with me. Don't like it? Leave and do what you want. But no decent establishment in town will hire you again." "So I have no choice?" Emily asked. "Quite clever, really." "Yes, I'm good at planning," the supervisor smirked. "Here's your first task. Put this powder in a couple of guests' dishes. It's just a laxative. Nothing serious will happen. The establishment will get negative reviews. Now, hurry up. Yesterday's dishes are waiting." Meanwhile, Emily kept in touch with Walter. He and his grandmother increasingly urged her to move in with them, with Tommy, to save on rent. Plus, Mrs. Marsh could pick up the child early from kindergarten. She seemed rejuvenated since the boy came into her life. But Emily hesitated, afraid of making another mistake. Then Deborah gave her a new task. The mayor was holding a reception at the restaurant. His main requirement was no seafood at the dinner. One of the important guests had a severe seafood allergy. That's what Deborah was counting on. Such a scandal would certainly not be hushed up. She discovered what the tall guest was allergic to, took out a concentrated solution, and asked Emily to pour it into his drink. "The noise will be great," the boss said, rubbing her hands together. "Can you imagine poisoning a man of that caliber?" "Yes," Emily replied and took the vial. Her boss held it with thin, gloved hands. "Look, don't confuse anything. I checked. He'll drink still mineral water and black coffee at the end of dinner." But the dishwasher had already made up her mind. She wasn't going to poison any guests. She knew the restaurant was Mr. Koskoff's life's work. He had started as a simple cook, made his fortune, but still loved to cook, especially when important people visited. Such a scandal would destroy him. Emily kept the vial. She planned to claim, "Your potion didn't work." When Deborah demanded a glass of sparkling wine to lift her spirits before the evening, Emily poured the vial's contents into her drink. After a few sips, the supervisor turned red and began swelling rapidly. Until then, she had kept her allergies secret. Of course, the woman survived, but she was really frightened from possible consequence. That evening, the reception went splendidly. The staff anticipated generous tips. Emily knew she would never work there again. She quietly finished washing the last plates, removed them from the machine, wiped them, and placed them to their place. The weekend passed, and Monday morning brought a call from Deborah, summoning Emily to collect her final payment. "Thought you could outsmart me," roared her boss. "Well, I'm alive, and now you're unemployed and will be scraping by. You loser." "Better unemployed than a poisoner," Emily replied. "Besides, you hate me. You'd have fired me anyway. What difference does it make, now or later?" "Ah, smarter than you look," Deborah sneered. "Now get out while you still can, and stay out of my way." From the restaurant, Emily went home. Today, she needed to pay the rent. The money she received would be enough for a month. But then what? When Emily told all her story to Walter and his grandmother, they immediately sprang into action, and finding helpful neighbours, moved Emily and Tommy's belongings to their apartment. The former landlady, however, promptly informed Ken of Emily's new address, which had been left just in case. The ex-husband
promised generous payment for this information, unable to rest, knowing Emily's situation was improving. The next morning, Tommy went to kindergarten, and Emily was going to return a few hours later for her son's kindergarten matinee. She even felt relieved about losing her job. Requesting time off from Deborah would have been impossible. Walking back to Walter's house, she entered the apartment building and felt someone catch the closing door behind her. Emily hurried up to the second floor, opened the door and slipped inside, but her ex-husband followed her into the apartment. "Ken, what are you doing? You scared me!" she cried, backing away.
"I need to know where my wife is sneaking off to," he said indignantly.
"Ex-wife," Emily corrected. "You have a new family."
"That doesn't matter. So, who you live with?" Ken strode into the room, spotted Walter in his wheelchair, and laughed. "No surprise here. The lovebirds reunited, as I see. Congratulations on your wonderful life with a cripple."
"That's none of your business," Emily snapped. "He's twice the man you are, and actually cares about my son."
"Is he even my child?" Ken snarled. "Maybe you two never stopped seeing each other. I've been walking around like a fool all these years. Anyway, just wait for the court summons. My child won't live with such an immoral mother. He's better off in boarding school."
After Ken left, Emily broke down in tears. She knew he was doing this deliberately to hurt her, but she felt powerless to stop him. Walter tried to comfort her. He reminded her that mothers should look beautiful at the matinee, not be crying. Emily finally calmed down. She put on her favourite dress, which she had once sewn for the prom. She let her hair down, styled it beautifully, did her makeup, and went to the party. Mrs. Marsh was also invited, but cited business and stayed home. Tommy's performance was sensational. He moved noticeably better than the other children. His dance with a girl from the kindergarten earned thunderous applause. The coach, who choreographed the number, was beaming. He approached the children, handed them their prizes, then walked toward Emily.
"Are you Tommy's mum?" he asked. "The boy has obvious talent. You've seen it yourself. It can't be taught. It's a natural gift."
"Yes, I'm seeing this side of my son for the first time," Emily smiled.
"Bring him to my studio. He could become a professional ballroom dancer. He'll win championships, I promise," the coach said, handing her his business card. "Such talent shouldn't be wasted."
"We'll do our best," Emily said, lowering her eyes. "I'm temporarily out of work, so paying for lessons will be difficult."
"I'm willing to teach Tommy for free," promised the coach, who introduced himself as Ruslan. "And don't worry about expenses like costumes. Someone here has an offer for you."
An elegantly dressed, beautiful young woman approached Emily. She was the mother of Tommy's dance partner. "Please don't say no," she began. "I'm Lynn, Melissa's mum. Finding boys for ballroom dancing is a real challenge. Finding a good partner can be harder than buying a car or house. We've been at this for 3 years, so we know what we talk. Your Tommy is exceptional. We're prepared to cover all costume and travel expenses. It's common practice, and our family can easily afford it. Just let Tommy dance with Melissa." "Wow! OK, agreed," Emily smiled. The children truly looked magical together. "And that's with almost no training," Lynn exclaimed. "For the championship, they'll prepare several dances and definitely win a prize." They exchanged contact information, and Lynn even offered to drive Tommy and his mother to and from classes, if needed. After saying goodbye, an elated Tommy walked home. The boy was inspired to dance after his first triumph. Meanwhile, Emily navigated the challenges and joys of motherhood. Deborah continued undermining the restaurant's reputation, attempting to force the establishment's closure. However, she couldn't complete her mission. The owner, unhappy with her staff dismissal policy, decided to contact his former employee directly.
"Emily, hello, this is Mr. Koskoff," he said over the phone. Please tell me, why did you leave?
I simply disagreed with Deborah, Emily replied, surprised.
Does she claim otherwise? No, I just can't understand letting a good employee go. If you're interested in returning, I'll hire you back, Mr. Koskoff responded.
The next day, over breakfast, Emily shared with Walter how Deborah was working against her boss. Then came the revelation. Walter burst out.
Are you really unaware? Or are you pretending? The competitor's restaurant is run by Hillary, my ex-wife. I created that restaurant, planned everything, then got pushed out because her father provided the funding.
Oh, Emily said, startled. What a shame! I really had no idea. So, how should we handle this? Could your ex's attempts to destroy her main competitor work in our favour?
Actually, yes, Walter replied, thoughtfully. Do you really want your job back?
Of course, Emily said. I love our restaurant, and the owner is wonderful. Besides, where else can I go in my situation? No education, no housing, with a small child.
Hold on, you mentioned the administrator Deborah, a tall, attractive brunette around 40, always wearing jewellery,
Walter described.
Yes, that's her, she confirmed. You look like you've seen her before. At her own wedding, Walter smirked. She's Hillary's aunt, her mother's younger sister. They're close friends, since the age gap isn't large. Your former employer truly nurtured a snake in his bosom.
Wow, I wonder if he knows, Emily mused.
Not necessarily. People rarely take interest in others' affairs, Walter replied. I just remembered this by chance. By the way, I have some information about both of them. Not exactly compromising material, but enough to prove their connection. There's just one problem.
What is it? Emily asked.
All the photos and videos from my past life are at my dacha. It's a couple of hours from the city by train. By the way, I developed photos too. I was into film.
I'll try to track down the evidence, Emily offered without hesitation.
Just be careful, okay? Walter asked. Those places have long been favoured by the homeless. I wouldn't be surprised if they've taken over the dacha. No one's been there for years. I protected you from stray dogs in our childhood, but here I'm powerless. I can't get there in my wheelchair. There's only a forest path from the train station to the woods.
The next morning, after taking her son to kindergarten, she put on an old tracksuit, ski jacket, warm hat and gloves, and set off. 3 hours later, she reached the old house through the forest path. Though abandoned and unkempt, there were signs of life. Smoke billowed from the stovepipe. Emily used her key to open the door. An unkempt, middle-aged woman in a stretched jumper blocked her way.
What are you doing here with keys? Is this your house? There's nothing for you here.
We're wintering, and we're not leaving, the homeless woman declared stubbornly. I'm not asking you to leave, Emily replied with a smile. I know you're wintering here. You see, the owner is paralysed, and I just need to collect some things. 5 minutes, then I'll go.
The poor man is paralysed. What a pity, sighed the woman.
Come in, I'm Wilma. This is Kelly and Ben. How did you get in?
Found the key in the spare room, Wilma smiled. I'm actually from a neighbouring town. After my stepchildren had driven me from their father's cottage after his death, I was left homeless, and these unfortunate souls joined me. We took this little house. Nobody ever comes here. We even made jam in the summer. Would you like some currant leaf tea?
Let's have some, Emily smiled. You know, I doubt Walter and his grandmother would have evicted you. Consider yourselves approved tenants.
That's wonderful, Wilma rejoiced. We're maintaining the plot and use everything very neatly.
So, where's the storage room with photographic supplies?
I'll show you, sweetie, Wilma beamed. What a relief to have the owner's permission.
Deep down, I was afraid of getting into jail for trespassing." She led Emily to the storeroom. En route, Emily observed the house, spotlessly clean, without empty bottles or signs of disorder. These people lived more like resort guests than squatters. Setting aside her thoughts, Emily began searching. She soon found a photo stack and carefully packed it in her rucksack. After exchanging phone numbers with Wilma, even the homeless had phones, she said goodbye and headed to the station. The return journey felt shorter and more cheerful. At home, Walter supported her decision about letting the homeless stay, especially after hearing the impression they made on Emily. "Call your former boss and arrange a meeting," Walter said after listening to the tapes. "Now you can back up your words with facts." "Is it really going to be possible to defend myself? You're saving me again," Emily smiled, "only this time from angry women and unemployment." "Well, knights always save their loved ones," replied Walter. "Nothing surprising here." "Do you still love me?" asked Emily, coming closer. "Never stopped," replied Walter. "To demand reciprocity in my position is foolish, I realise, but that's just the way it is." "Oh, stop it. I'm ready to marry you even now." "Should we go to the registry office?" said Emily. "Are you proposing to me now?" laughed Walter. "It appears so." Emily smiled happily. "Do you agree or not?" "Granny, there's my wedding coming up," shouted Walter at the top of his voice. "You'll have to put aside your dying plans that scare me every day." "Where can I go now?" Mrs. Marsh entered the room, smiling happily. "And anyway, I'm only 70. I expect at least 2 more grandchildren." An hour later, Emily went to the restaurant for a difficult conversation with her former boss. Fortunately, he was available and agreed to see her. Though initially nervous in his office, she eventually gathered her courage. "Did you know that Deborah is related to the owner of your main competitor?" asked Emily. "Impossible!" exclaimed the former chief indignantly. "I would never meet, much less hire someone from a rival business. It would be foolish." "Then perhaps this is worth examining." Emily placed the photos on the supervisor's desk. "Great," Mr. Koskoff sighed. "I've been wondering who the traitor was, and she was right under my nose all this time. Oh, that's their ex-chef in the picture. Very talented guy. I wonder where he is now. Anyway, I need time to review all this information. What do you want in return?" "Only justice," said Emily tiredly, and left the office, finally allowing herself to tremble from the stress and adrenaline. She had to get Tommy from daycare. That evening Mr. Koskoff called, requesting a meeting. Emily invited him to Walter's home. The former boss understood everything instantly upon seeing a man in a wheelchair in the kitchen. "Was it for his operation that you asked the money?" Mr. Koskoff asked Emily. "I'll provide it. Interest-free loan, if you prefer." "Yes, that would suit us perfectly," replied Emily cheerfully. "What have you decided about the other matter?" "We'll fight the competition, but honestly, come back as administrator. The restaurant needs you. Would that work for you?" "Absolutely!" Emily could barely contain her joy. "Have you found a dishwasher yet?" "No luck, but you know how hard it is to find workers these days," replied Mr. Koskoff. "If you have someone in mind, hire them." "I think I can help," Emily smiled. "Of course, I'll advance it to you now, and don't delay the surgery. I understand too much time has been lost already." After Mr. Koskoff left, Emily and Walter submitted their marriage application remotely the next morning. They wanted to be married before the operation. The new administrator then went to manage the restaurant. The staff welcomed the change enthusiastically. While updating the menu, Emily made a phone call. "Wilma, I have a business proposition. Would you like to try working as a dishwasher at the restaurant under my supervision? I can help with housing too. Come to town and I'll explain everything." That evening, after leaving her son, With Mrs. Walsh and Walter, she met Wilma at the station. The homeless woman stood clutching a large bag, looking lost. Emily took her to her former landlady, paid 2 months' rent in advance. Mr. Koskoff was pleased with a new dishwasher, and Emily got a bonus for finding a new employee. This development didn't escape Ken's notice. The ex-husband appeared at the restaurant one morning to speak with Emily.
"Look, we both made a tragic mistake by splitting up, but it's time to fix it," Ken declared. "I'll divorce Carla and we'll reunite. I'll even overlook your sins and betrayal."
"Ken, what are you talking about?" Emily cut off his dramatic speech. "You were the one who cheated and left, not me."
"I've come to my senses and am ready to spend my life with you. That is, to start a family again," replied Ken, eyeing his ex-wife in her new stylish business suit.
Emily looked radiant. "Sorry, I'm not interested," she replied.
"Well, then be prepared. One day I'll take Tommy from daycare and you'll never see him again," Ken threatened. "With a mother like you, he doesn't belong here. You live with your lover. You have no home. Meanwhile, my mother and I have 2 apartments.
"Ken, your threats don't work anymore. I'm getting married tomorrow and will have my husband's place. Keep embarrassing yourself with empty threats if you like. Or let's go to court. We'll see who's right. The father who hasn't seen his son in a year or paid child support, or the mother who cares for him daily."
"Oh, your new position has made you bold," the ex-husband snarled.
"Enough of this nonsense. Go on. I have work to do."
"You could at least offer me a free coffee," the ex-husband grumbled. "We're not complete strangers."
The next day, Emily and Walter became a wife and a husband. Tommy attended and presented his mother with flowers, which Mrs. Marsh had helped him select and purchase. The elderly woman had grown deeply attached to the boy and now considered him her own grandson. 2 weeks later, Walter underwent surgery. It was successful, and the doctors gave optimistic prognoses. A month later, he took his first steps with a walker's support, though he still needed rehabilitation, which Mr. Koskoff helped finance. He explained it this way.
"Look, kid, consider my offer. I know you're an exceptional cook and I want one for my restaurant. Focus on recovery, get better, then come work for me." "You know, I might still be on disability. I can probably work, but I'll need a cane," Walter replied. "No problem. We'll modify the kitchen to accommodate you. We'll make the chef with a cane our signature feature." Mr. Koskoff grinned. "But honestly, I believe in you and medicine."
The restaurant owner now regularly drove Emily home after closing, discussing important matters. She learned that 2 other people had been forced to report everything to Deborah out of fear. Now they were free from that obligation. With her information sources, Deborah lost favour with her niece, especially since Hilary had sought solace in wine. 6 months later, her restaurant closed. It was officially listed for sale after she was declared bankrupt. It emerged that she owed money across the city, trading on her father's reputation. Walter completed rehabilitation. His disability status was removed. The young man was returning to life and his beloved profession. He began by cooking at home, then invited Mr. Koskoff for a tasting. After sampling the dishes, Mr. Koskoff immediately insisted on adding them to the restaurant's menu. "This will be remarkable. You're invaluable. It's time to turn to your profession. You're a natural-born chef. You've just proven that to me conclusively." Walter smiled modestly, and soon he was back in his field. Meanwhile, Tommy was thriving in ballroom dancing. He and Melissa won competition after competition. The whole family now cheered him on at competitions. Mrs. Marsh learned all the dance terminology and even joined an adult group at the same dance school. Walter smiled watching his granny shop for dance shoes. He never imagined he could be this happy again, especially when Emily shared news of her pregnancy.